Bom, olá a todos e a todas. Essa entrevista é parte de uma série de entrevistas com personalidades israelenses que organiza o Centro de Estudos Judaicos da USP com a Academia Judaica e o grupo dos Bogrei Hazit do ano 73. E hoje a gente tem a honra e o privilégio de receber aqui a Dani Dayan. Dani Dayan, que é o presidente do Yad Vashem, que é o Centro Mundial de Memória do Holocausto. No campo da diplomacia, ele já ocupou o cargo de cônsul-geral de Israel em Nova York, também atuou em diversas outras funções importantes, como o Conselho Consultivo do Nefesh Benefesh e outras funções, mas tem uma aqui de extrema importância que ele acaba de assumir há pouco mais de um mês. Israel assumiu a presidência da Aliança Internacional para a Memória do Holocausto, e no dia 3 de março deste ano, substituindo o Reino Unido, Israel assume esse papel neste ano, até fevereiro de 2026, e Dani Dayan assume a presidência em representação de Israel. Então, nós temos aqui uma combinação de fatores que tornam mais relevante ainda essa entrevista, dada as posições que o Dani hoje assume e representa. E essa entrevista vai ser conduzida por duas mulheres fabulosas. A professora Susana Schwartz é a diretora do Centro de Estudos Judaicos da USP, de formação é arqueóloga bíblica pela Universidade Hebraica de Jerusalém. Também estudou letras clássicas e culturas do Oriente Médio Antigo e jornalismo político na Universidade de Tel Aviv. O seu doutorado foi obtido no programa de Língua, Literatura e Cultura Judaica da USP, que é a universidade na qual ela leciona desde 2004 e assumiu a função de professora associada livre-docente em 2012, a função que ela exerce até o momento. E também temos conosco a doutora Clarita Maia, que é consultora legislativa do Senado Federal aqui no Brasil, na área de relações internacionais. Ela é doutora em Direito Internacional pela Universidade de São Paulo, especialista em Direito Internacional de Conflitos Armados pela Universidade de Brasília e também a Universidade de Bochum, na Alemanha, presidente da Comissão de Relações Internacionais da OAB do Brasil, na seccional do Distrito Federal, e da nossa parte, o nosso orgulho, que é membro ativa da Havurá de Direito e Judaísmo, da Academia Judaica, que é um coletivo no qual ela, neste momento, ela está como representante nesse diálogo. Então, eu passo a palavra, depois dessas breves apresentações e dessa introdução, passo a palavra para a professora doutora Susana Schwartz para dar início e conduzir essa entrevista junto com a querida Clarita.
Thank you, Kelita, for the presentation. Thank you so much, Dani, to be with us in such a busy week, the busiest, I guess, and you took the time to talk to us. We deeply appreciate that. Many people around the world visited already Yad Vashem, but few people know the meaning and the origin of the biblical expression Yad Vashem, and why it was chosen to be the name of a world center for remembrance of Holocaust in Israel. Would you please explain to us this passage in Isaiah and how this name relates to the goals and to the achievements of Yad Vashem?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Rabbi Cohen, for your kind introduction, and to you, Professor Schwartz, for having me in this platform together with Tomer. It's really a privilege to be with you, and honor. Yes, as you said, the name Yad Vashem, which was not an obvious choice for the name for the memorial of the Holocaust, was chosen already Actually, the Yad Vashem law was legislated by the Knesset in 1953, but the name Yad Vashem was already suggested earlier in the 40s. And it's taken from a passage in Isaiah, as you said, to them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name. Yad Vashem, better than sons and daughters, I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. And it's not so important why exactly this name was chosen, as it is important the significance that we give it today. And I want to concentrate in the second word, in the word Shem, in the word name. I think that one of the first things that the Nazi tried to do with the Jews is to deprive them from their name, to convert them into a number tattooed in their arms, and deprive them from their name. And indeed, one of the missions that we have in Yad Vashem is to give back the name, the face, the personality, as much as we can to each one of the 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Shoah. A survivor from the Netherlands, Abel Herzberg, said once that the Holocaust was not the murder of 6 million Jews. Rather, it was 6 million murders in each one of them, one Jew, man or woman, was assassinated. And that's the reason that one of the most ambitious and successful projects of Yad Vashem is to collect the names. We have in Yad Vashem a display, the Book of Names, that is a room-large display that has more than 4,800,000 individual names of victims of the Holocaust, and we continue to register and to gather names. Giving back the name to each one of the victims is a way of giving them back their dignity as human beings and as Jews.
The word Yad talks to me because it's not a place, it's a memorial. And the aim of Yad Vashem is to be a center for remembering, but a living memory, a memory that is ever changing. We say it's our Jewish custom to say of our dead, may the memory be a blessing. In the case of the Holocaust, we say may the memory be a blessing and also a warning. But how can we reconcile these two things? A blessing and a warning. What is the didactics of a Yad Vashem to foster the memory that is not static, it's not in the past?
I think that Holocaust remembrance today should be based on 4 pillars. And I would like to enumerate them briefly. The first one is almost obvious, mourning. It's clear that when we talk about 6 million Jews murdered, we mourn them, we are sad. But to be sad is not a strategy. It's not a way, as you said, to learn lessons and to implement them. So I think that the second pillar of Holocaust remembrance now should be to know. I think that we have not just a right, we have an obligation to know everything that happened during those dark times. For 3 reasons: for the future, for the present, and no less than that for the past. And probably that combination is what you refer in your question. For the future, because we have is a warning. We are in the what we call the crossroads of generations. Unfortunately, in a few years, I hope many years, but we are realistic, we will live in a world without witnesses of the Shoah, without survivors. When that happens, that will be, I'm afraid, the happy hour of the nihilists, the distortionists. So we have to know everything that happened with authority, with authenticity in order to confront them. it's important for the present. We see rampant anti-Semitism all over the world, almost all over the world, and I think it's a red light to leaders and to educators and to law enforcement. But I think we have that obligation, and here I come for the blessing that also for the past. You know, since I became chairman of Yad Vashem, I think constantly I started thinking about a 12-year-old Jewish girl, bat mitzvah age. Sometimes I think of her in the shooting pits in Babi Yar, sometimes in the gas chambers in Auschwitz, or in that synagogue in Bialystok, in which the entire congregation was taken in and set afire. And I think, what did that Jewish girl, very young Jewish girl, think in her last moments when she understood, she grasped what is going to happen to her? And obviously we will never know because she perished. But I believe that she thought, I hope that someone learns is interested enough to know who I was. What was my name, my face, my hobbies. And I thought I'm imagining that, but then I came across a diary of Miriam Khashavetsky from Radomsk, a 17-year-old Jewish girl. And she writes something amazing. She writes in one of the entries, the last entries in her diary, she writes, I hope that someone finds this diary to know who I was, even, listen to this, even if it's a Nazi soldier. But someone in the world know who I was. Thank God we found that diary, and we published in many languages and printed in thousands and tens of thousands of volumes. But it's a debt that we have to them. The third pillar, in my view, is to empathize with the victims. In order to, and you know, in Pesach we say, in every generation, a Jew has to see himself as he himself or herself were liberated from Egypt. I think that now we also have to see ourselves as if we were liberated from Auschwitz. And the fourth, and probably the most important, is to learn lessons. I am a believer that every lesson learned by a decent person is legitimate, even if sometimes the lessons are contradicting. I will give you a brief example. In Yad Vashem, there is something that is called the Council of Yad Vashem. Its current chairman is Rabbi Israel Meir Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, a survivor from Buchenwald. His lesson from the Shoah is to dedicate his life to God. But his predecessor, Yosef Tomi Lapid, a former Minister of Justice, a survivor from the Budapest ghetto, learned from the Shoah that God doesn't exist. We are not a tribunal. We don't judge between them. Both are legitimate lessons from the Shoah, and we have to live with those contradictions.
Tomi Lapid was my teacher in journalism at the University of Tel Aviv.
And also the father of former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, of course.
Yeah, different. So I read a few days before Yom HaShoah and the Gvura in Israel that the education, I read in Haaretz, the education ministry and Yad Vashem are launching a new curriculum to teach the Shoah in schools, starting in kindergarten. This program will be centered on the Jewish Zionist legacy on one hand, and on the human universal legacy on the other hand. I have two questions. Doesn't the Jewish Zionist aspect that somehow builds Israel's legitimacy on the Shoah and presents Israel somehow as a reparation prize for Jewish refugees around the world fuels the anti-Jewish arguments on an elite, European, white, blah, blah, colonialism, blah, blah. The second is no doubt to include other people's suffering is definitely a key to foster empathy, as you said, the core of conscience. But on the other side, the fact that so few rose to save and rescue the Jews, and that the Jews were so lonely and helpless in the world, doesn't this undermine children's innocent belief in humanity? Doesn't Israeli children have not enough in their plate already?
Well, a few things that are important for me to say. First of all, in Israel, we don't have the prerogative not to involve children in Shoah education because it's there. In Yom HaShoah, in Holocaust Remembrance Day, at 10 a.m. exactly, a siren is sound all over the country, all over the state. And if children know it's about the Shoah, what is the Shoah? You have to explain to them. It's not an option not to explain why the country comes to a standstill and Yom HaShoah at 10 in the morning. You spoke about the new curriculum. Actually, is a constant update of the curriculum that we do with the Ministry of Education. And yes, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, a big challenge, how to teach about the trauma without traumatizing the students, especially if they are children. I think that's the main challenge. That's one of the reasons, for instance, that we never, ever will use simulations. In the sense, I used earlier the word empathizing. I didn't use the word identifying. One of the core principles of our educational philosophy, of our pedagogical philosophy, is that you never enter Auschwitz. You look at Auschwitz from outside. That makes a huge difference in the pedagogical attitude that we use. And I think that the pedagogical philosophy that we developed in Yad Vashem, that my predecessors developed in Yad Vashem, is really outstanding in that sense that indeed tackles the challenge of educating about such a traumatic event without traumatizing. On the contrary, carving from that values like resilience, and yes, like not being a bystander from negative behaviors of others, you can teach how, you can educate how a decent human being should educate. But I want to take exception with something that you said, Professor Schwartz, and that is the reason of the creation of the State of Israel. We will never say that Israel is a reparation prize for the Shoah, because that's not true.
That's not true.
You know, actually, I remember that when President Joe Biden of the United States came to Yad Vashem in the summer of 2022, and I was his host, the first thing I told him when he came out, when we walked from his limousine to the Hall of Remembrance, in the Hall of Remembrance were waiting for him all the dignitaries of the State of Israel, I told him two things. The first thing I told him is, Mr. President, you should know that Israel was not established because of the Shoah. Israel was established in spite of the Shoah. Israel was established because a 2,000-year yearning to return, and because we fought for it. And we fought for our independence in the period in time in which the Jewish people was the weakest. A third of our people has just been annihilated. So under no circumstances we will say that Israel is a consolation prize for the Shoah. On the contrary. The second thing I told the president is different. I told him, Mr. President, if you want to understand Israel, if you want to understand the Israeli society, if you want to understand the Israeli leadership, and if you want to understand the individual Israeli, you should know that the Shoah is always omnipresent in the back of our minds, as individuals, as in the collective. It's always there. And sometimes is the way to explain our behavior, our decisions, because the Shoah is always in our minds. In one way or another, it's always in our minds.
And what about the helplessness of the Jewish people? You know, as a young student, I remember this disturbed me profoundly because it was not part of my reality. It seems odd that we were in this situation, in this isolation. We are sort of living a little bit of this again.
That's the reason, Professor Schwartz, that I reject completely, and I do it publicly almost every week. I have to do that. I reject completely the comparison between the Shoah and October 7th. October 7th is not a continuation of the Shoah. October 7th is not the Shoah 2.0. Of course, there are similarities. The cruelty, the sadism, and even the intention. You know, the intention was genocidal. But the differences are huge, much greater than the similarities. And the main difference is what you just said. We are not helpless. In the Shoah, in Second World War, the maximum world Jewry could do is to beg President Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill to bomb the railways conducting to Auschwitz, and they didn't. Now, yes, we did it. We failed on October 7th, but after October 7th came October 8th, and we do what we consider necessary. You know, I think, for instance, of the young soldiers that arrived first to the kibbutzim, or the first responders in the kibbutzim, what we call the kitot konenut. The heroism is, they were heroes, exactly or no less than Mordechai Anilevich in the Warsaw Ghetto. But the reason why they fought was different. In the ghettos, the Jews fought in order to die with dignity. In the kibbutzim, Jews fought in order to save lives. And that's a completely different thing. But I will tell you more than that. An additional reason why I think it's important to stress that October 7th and the Shoah are completely different things, and the October 7th is not the Shoah, a continuation of the Shoah, is because if we do that, we play into the hands of Hamas. What is terror? Terror is the attempt to terrorize the society, the population of your enemy. This is nothing that will terrorize us more, make us more scared than to believe that we are again in the ghettos or in the path that conduct to the gas chambers. That's the reason for which I did something that, I don't know, there are those that criticize me for doing that, but I criticized publicly our ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, when he put on his lapel jacket, to his jacket lapel in the Security Council of the United Nations, a yellow star. I thought that's the wrong message. That's the red message of the Jews being at the mercy of others. What we should now display is exactly the opposite of a yellow star.
Right. Yes. I'll ask, thank you so much, so important, the things you said. Please, Dr. Clarita will ask some questions.
Mr. Dayan, it's a pleasure and an honor to meet you. In January this year, during the Franco-Brazilian colloquium on museum law, much was said and explored about the still irreplaceable capacity of museums to educate through information and also through the creation of empathy. But we have a very poor ecosystem of museums in Brazil. According to our National Register of Museums, Brazil has only 3,700 museums and only 3 museums of remembrance of the Holocaust. This scenario combined with the mediocrity of the teaching of history in Brazil, but around the world, something that was noted by Susan Eisenhower, the granddaughter of Dwight Eisenhower and the founding director of the Eisenhower Institute for Peace and Democracy, creates a state of alert not only in Brazil, but in the world. Education, by all its means, an antidote for misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, and political extremism, is not being adequately mastered. Are there any projects between the Yad Vashem and international institutions advocating for more appropriate teaching about the factors that led to the World War II and anti-Semitism, and also the importance of Zionism today, which is a legitimate plea for national autonomy for the Jewish people, turn it to be a bad word nowadays? If there are some projects, what would they be? If there is none, what are the paths ahead?
Yes, when I came to Yad Vashem to chair Yad Vashem in August 2021, it was clear for me that we cannot remain an Israeli organization, an Israeli institution. We have to go global. And that's hard. We need a completely different magnitude of means and financial means and other means in order to do that, but I think it's important. And I will tell you, I visited Germany, Berlin in January 2022. It was my first ever visit to Germany. At a very young age, I decided never to visit Germany. But when I was invited by the president of the German parliament, I had a few sleepless nights, and I decided to go to break the vow, the neder, the vow that I made as a teenager. And the reason I did it is because I understood that by going, I strengthened memory. And indeed, I had extensive meetings with all the German leadership, including the president and the prime minister, Olaf Scholz. And I suggested to Olaf Scholz that we open the first educational center of Yad Vashem outside Israel in Germany, and he immediately agreed. And we are in the process of establishing an educational center of Yad Vashem in Germany. Now, it is clear that an educational center of Yad Vashem in the land of the perpetrators will be completely different from establishing Yad Vashem in the land of the victims, and we will have to adapt that. And there is another challenge. We are talking now in Europe and in other parts of the world. We are talking about multicultural, multi-ethnic societies. That makes our task even harder. But we are determined to fulfill it. Germany is the first step, but we are already planning another one in Greece, and later probably we will come to the American continent. I'm not naive to believe that education is a cure for anti-Semitism. Law enforcement is also needed. But we have to concentrate on education because it's central to building a better world for the future. Now, you mentioned the vilification of Zionism all over the world. I know very well the United States universities. I was consul general in New York, and I spoke virtually in all the Ivy League universities in the East Coast. And also I have a daughter that was for 5 years a very active pro-Israel activist in Columbia University. When I heard what is happening in the universities after October 7th, I decided that I have to see it by myself. And I traveled to the US. I met the then president of Columbia University, then president of the University of Pennsylvania, and others. And I think that I told them that what they are doing now is even now is logistics, is where you can have a demonstration, where you cannot have a demonstration. But I think that the problem that the academia is facing these days in the Western world is that they don't take a moral standing, moral leadership on the issues that you mentioned. The question if is legitimate. I think that presidents of universities have to make a decision whether calls for the annihilation of the state of Israel are within the boundaries of the legitimate discourse in their universities. And till now, they are not making a decision, not this way and not the other way. And that is the disgrace. And until they don't make that decision, that calling for the elimination of the Jewish state is bigotry, is like racism, the deterioration of the universities will continue. I am sorry that they take now some measures because they are being pressured by the government by the administration of Donald Trump. It should come from their inner conviction, and unfortunately it doesn't. And I told the president of Columbia University, since then she resigned, but I told her that there was in Germany a famous university, the University of Heidelberg. In the 1920s, the University of Heidelberg was a beacon of liberalism. 10 years later, it gave the pseudo-academic backing to Adolf Hitler. And it will remember forever as the university that gave the pseudo-scientific backing to Adolf Hitler. I told the president of Columbia, the Jews this time will not pay the price. We have today a state, we have today a completely different situation. The question that you should consider is how the Columbia University will be remembered. I am not sure how it will be remembered 50 years from now.
It is very interesting because in October was that year when the attacks happened. I was in Georgetown in a leadership program. And in the campus, where I saw war chants, I didn't see students advocating for peace talks, for dialogue. Very much the contrary. Georgetown is very well known as the cradle of the diplomats in the USA. So it was for me a great red flag. And I didn't see actually any movement from the part of Georgetown in the sense of getting all the students in a table to converge, to talk and to have more moderate deliberations. It was something very frightening for me. And what I saw actually was that there is a displacement between the agenda of the universities and the real power of this academic agenda to touch really the hearts and the behaviors of the students. It seems that those are two different separate things.
In some senses, I am much more worried about the inciting professors, the inciting faculty than by the incited students. I think that what we are witnessing is that step by step, stone by stone, article by article, book by book, using pseudo-academic vocabulary, an academic theory pseudo-academic theory that calls for the elimination of the Jewish state is being built. And the world, including academic leadership, is completely apathic to that. Completely, again, in the best case, they act like bystanders. And the Pavlovian response of the presidents of the universities was, well, First Amendment, freedom of speech, academic freedom. And I told the president of the University of Pennsylvania, Madam President, you know and I know that if a sociology professor in your university will write a book or an article calling to ostracize from society all the LGBTQ community, and he will explain it with academic terms, etc., he or she, that professor, will be fired the following day, and rightly so. But if he or she calls for the elimination of the Jewish state, good chances that he or she will be promoted. So the use of freedom of expression or academic freedom here is a lame excuse and not the truth.
Mr. Dayan, I watched your interview to Deutsche Welle talking about your hard decision on finally visiting Germany after that vow. And talking about Germany, talking about nights without sleep. At the end of the Angela Merkel term, she had her cabinet read Christopher Clark's famous book, Sleepwalkers. The motto of the book was that the First World War could be avoided if the leaders talked more clearly and transparently to each other. But more than that, the reasons that led to the First World War were the growth, basically the growth of sectarian passions. Those sectarian passions were labeled as nationalism, which had anti-Semitism as an addendum. Germany is doing or trying to do its homework. Well, let us see, in combating anti-Semitism. You talked about Greece and also the country that I don't remember. Which are the European countries that are seriously engaged in combating anti-Semitism? Are those that adopted IHRA or not? Is IHRA a useful tool in combating anti-Semitism and the educational part and law enforcement part? What is your experience on that?
Well, it's of course the adoption of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is important because you need it in order to combat something. You have to define it, and I'm positive that the IHRA definition is the most accurate, the most right, the most true definition of anti-Semitism. But you mentioned Germany. I want to tell you about Germany that yes, you are completely right that the leadership of Germany learned its lesson. Actually, the first leader I had the privilege to host in Yad Vashem after I assumed my position as chairman was Angela Merkel in her last days as chancellor, as prime minister of Germany. And she made a point in coming to Yad Vashem. It was, I believe, her 6th or 7th visit to Yad Vashem, and she came for 3 hours. And it was a very emotional visit, and she had a very unusual request. She asked to be left alone without any escort, including security, for 15 minutes in the museum. We have no idea what she did. I assume she reflected, but it was very moving. But I also told her, and I told her successor, Olaf Scholz, and I told also who appears to be the next chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the leadership to say that and believe, not only to say it, say and believe the right things in that respect is important. But the real challenge is whether the beliefs of the leadership trickle down to the civil society. And I am not sure there is a huge success in Germany in that respect. We see the success of the AfD party, the extreme right with neo-Nazi roots and neo-Nazi sympathies in Germany, success in the last elections. They will not form a government, they will not be part of the government, but it was a very significant success, and it seems that the support for that party is growing. So that means that we are doing something wrong, and we should recalibrate our efforts. In Austria is an extremely interesting case. Austria was after the Second World War, after the Shoah, for decades, they had the I will use the Hebrew word, they had the chutzpah to define themselves as the first victims of Hitler. Because they were annexed in 1938, but we all know that they were willingly annexed. Austria underwent an incredible process of coming to terms with its past, and today the leadership again acknowledged that Austria is perpetrator country no less than Germany. But we see different manifestations of what you said, Dr. Maya, in different countries. What we see, for instance, in many former Soviet Union, former members of the Soviet Union, like, for instance, in the Baltic states, in Lithuania, in Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, is a glorification of war criminals. That are considered national heroes because they killed Jews, but they also fought the communists later. So, and that's terrible. I said I had the opportunity to speak in the plenary of the Lithuanian parliament, and I said that an anti-Semite is an anti-Semite is an anti-Semite, and it cannot be an anti-Semite by otherwise a good person. No, especially if he's a butcher of Jews. We saw just last week in Latvia exoneration of a war criminal, infamous war criminal, that the file against him was closed, and that's very disturbing. We see in Russia, in the Russian Federation, going back to the old bad Soviet form of teaching, the Shoah, talking about Soviet citizens instead of talking about Jews, erasing the de-Judaization of the Holocaust. And we saw it even in Western Europe. In France, there was a presidential candidate that at some point had quite a significant support that spoke about, he claimed that the Vichy regime was benevolent toward the Jews, which is completely lie. So Holocaust distortion is rampant, and it is a form of anti-Semitism.
It's I'm disconcerted by this review. I was more hopeful that the political elites of Europe were more aware of the risks of giving space to anti-Semitism. But leading to my
That said, I must say that again, that in most countries in the leadership of the European Union, the president of the European Commission, Dr. von der Leyen, they are committed to fight anti-Semitism, but it's an uphill battle when you are talking about complex societies in their countries.
Well, this leads me to the third question, that is, would it not be interesting to connect more openly the plea for combating anti-Semitism with something that is under the radar of many institutions, academia, that is the political extremism, political violence, political divisiveness, because all of this led to a component of racism and anti-Semitism. Scandinavian academicists are taking the lead of this kind of research, trying to calibrate this research with trying to understand and to project when political extremism will lead to civil war and even to world war. There are some important institutions dedicated to that. Wouldn't it be interesting to somehow connect more amply the combat of anti-Semitism to all these agendas, because they are congenial?
I agree completely, and I will tell you more than that. In Yad Vashem are very explicit in condemning every form of extremism. But I will tell you something. I know it's pessimistic, but I am almost 70 years old. I think that in the last years, for the first time in my life, I am pessimistic towards the future of democracy. And the reason I am pessimistic or worried is exactly that is extremism. When each side of the political spectrum looks at its adversary, at its opponent, not only as an adversary or an opponent, but as an enemy. That if he wins an election, it will be catastrophic. It will be the end of the country. And we see that in many countries. That is a danger. Then you cannot allow to yourself to lose an election by any means. And that is a grave danger to democracy. So, I sometimes think that the Western world, at least the Western world, had a very good 70 years from 1950 to 2020. There was a period of relative peace, prosperity, democracy, freedom. I don't know if the next 70 years will be the same, and that the reason is extremism. The reason for my being worried of that is extremism. So yes, I think we have to educate and to combine that. What is the role of Yad Vashem in that? That is a different question because, my predecessors made a decision that I completely agree with, that Yad Vashem is an institution that 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Shoah deserve an institution that is exclusively dedicated to them. And that's the reason we are very careful to deal with other things. For instance, we taught the Rwandan government how to commemorate the Tutsi genocide in Rwanda. They came to Yad Vashem and they learned how to do that. But we don't have in Yad Vashem an exhibition about the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda. That's sometimes that is misunderstood. People think that we are not sensitive enough. We are very sensitive to other genocides, but we believe that there should be one institution that is dedicated to the 6 million Jews that were murdered. And in general, we are the institution of the victims. If you come to Yad Vashem Museum, for instance, we will see very little about the perpetrators. We concentrate on the victims. But you are right, extremism poses a great danger to many societies all over the world, in many, many countries, and that's a worrying development. And I don't know if anti-Semitism is a result of extremism, is a result of anti-Semitism, but it doesn't matter. I agree that the fight is the same fight.
First of all, I would thank Mr. Dayan for your time and your generosity in giving us such important interview, and for your generosity also. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to end everything. Clarita already thanked you, so I won't repeat. But you said, you threw words, very important words: victim, perpetrator, bystander. Professor Yehuda Bauer, one of the foremost professors of Holocaust studies at the Hebrew University, set 3 commandments regarding the Shoah. You shall not be a victim. You shall not be a perpetrator. You shall not be a bystander. Danny, can we fulfill this promise?
We have no other choice but to do that. We have no other choice but to do that as Jews, as human beings. Again, the Shoah is a Jewish event, a human event. Probably in that order should be said. But of course, it's not as so aptly as Yehuda Bauer said it. We think we have no choice than to do that. And I also probably will add to that quote of Elie Wiesel, the survivor, the Peace Nobel Prize winner, that he said that the opposite of love is not hate, is indifference. And we should not be indifferent to to bigotry, to racism, to anti-Semitism, to xenophobia, to extremism. We should be determined. Yehuda Bauer also said, he passed away less than a year ago at the age of 99. Probably he was the most eminent Holocaust scholar in the world. He headed our research institute in Yad Vashem. He said also, I struggle, therefore I exist. And we should choose the right struggles in order to exist as decent human beings.
Well,
You.
Thank you
thank
so much.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Toda rabba rabba, and I hope that next time we will meet in person in São Paulo
Yes,
In Jerusalem.
or in Jerusalem, of course.
Thank you.
we would like
Bye.
also to
Shalom.
thank all the people who participate in making this important interview happen. The technicians, translators, the team of the Center of Jewish Studies at USP, also our team of Jewish Academy with the Havurah of Law and Judaism, and the Bogrei Hazit.
Bye.
Shalom,
See
shalom.
you soon. Shalom.